Hi, I'm Rebecca Martinez, and 3 months ago, my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never understood what you went through. I thought you were the villain in my story, but you were actually the hero I was too young to recognize." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What my daughter didn't know was that every sacrifice I made, every choice that seemed selfish to her, every moment she felt abandoned or unloved, was actually me fighting tooth and nail to give her the life I never had. But let me tell you how we got there, because the moment my daughter finally understood changed everything between us. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., the same jarring sound that had pulled me from exhausted sleep every weekday for the past 8 years. I rolled over in my narrow twin bed, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back from the cheap mattress that I kept telling myself I'd replace once I could afford something better. Through the paper-thin walls of our 2-bedroom apartment in East Cleveland, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's television already blaring the morning news. At 26, I was already bone-tired in a way that seemed permanent, like exhaustion had settled into my DNA and was now just part of who I was. But Maya was still sleeping in the room next to mine, her 7-year-old face peaceful in the dim light filtering through our bargain store curtains, and that was enough to get me moving. The shower water took 3 minutes to warm up, so I'd learned to brush my teeth and wash my face in cold water while waiting. Our bathroom mirror had a crack running diagonally across it, a souvenir from the previous tenant that the landlord had never bothered to fix. I stared at my reflection, noting the dark circles under my brown eyes that no amount of concealer seemed to hide anymore, the way my cheekbones had become more pronounced since I'd started skipping meals to make sure Maya had enough to eat. My nursing scrubs hung on a hook behind the door, freshly washed but showing their age in the faded blue fabric and fraying seams around the pockets. I'd bought them secondhand from a medical supply store when I first started working at Cleveland General Hospital, and they'd been through countless wash cycles since then. But they were clean, professional, and most importantly, they represented the job that was slowly, painfully lifting us out of the cycle of poverty that had defined my entire childhood. In the kitchen, I moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency. Coffee for me, cheap, instant, that tasted like burnt water but delivered the caffeine I desperately needed. A bowl of generic brand cereal with milk that would expire tomorrow but would stretch until my next grocery run on Friday. I packed her lunch in a brown paper bag, the same bag I'd been reusing for 2 weeks, carefully folded and smoothed to hide the wrinkles. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich on white bread, an apple that was starting to get soft, and a small bag of store-brand crackers. It wasn't the elaborate, Instagram-worthy lunches that some of the other kids brought to school, but it was nutritious and made with love, even if Maya was too young to understand the calculations that went into every grocery purchase. The sound of Maya's feet hitting the floor in her bedroom meant she was awake, probably awakened by the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of me moving around the apartment. She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her favorite pajamas, a set with cartoon pandas that were starting to pill from too many washings, her dark hair sticking up in impossible directions. "Morning, baby," I said, kneeling down to smooth her hair and plant a kiss on the top of her head. She smelled of sleep and the strawberry shampoo I'd splurged on last month because she'd asked for it specifically. These small moments of tenderness were what I lived for, the brief windows when it was just us and the outside world couldn't intrude on our little bubble of love. "Do I have to go to school today?" Maya asked, a question that had become more frequent over the past few months. She wasn't being bratty or defiant. There was something in her voice that sounded almost wistful, like she was hoping for a different answer but expecting disappointment. "You do, sweetheart. Mrs. Johnson is probably planning something fun for art class today." I kept my voice cheerful, but I could see the slight slump in her shoulders that meant she was thinking about something that was bothering her. Maya had always been an observant child,
more emotionally intelligent than most kids her age, which sometimes felt like a blessing and sometimes felt like a burden. She ate her cereal quietly while I finished getting ready, checking my reflection one more time in the hallway mirror and applying a thin layer of lipstick that made me look more put together than I felt. A nursing program at Cuyahoga Community College had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, juggling classes, clinical rotations, and single motherhood while working part-time at a diner to keep us afloat. But graduating was worth every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every moment of doubt. The job at Cleveland General paid more than anything I had ever done before, and it came with health insurance, benefits, and the possibility of advancement that had never existed in any of my previous jobs.
The walk to Maya's elementary school was 6 blocks through a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying, with coffee shops and boutiques starting to appear alongside the check-cashing stores and corner markets that had dominated the area for decades. Maya's small hand in mine felt warm despite the October chill, and she chattered about her friend Samantha and the book they were reading in class, her earlier reluctance about school seemingly forgotten. Washington Elementary was a brick building that had seen better decades, with a playground that could have used updating, and classrooms that were overcrowded but filled with dedicated teachers who genuinely cared about their students. I walked Maya to her classroom, kissing her goodbye and watching her settle at her desk before heading back out into the morning air. The bus ride to the hospital took 45 minutes through morning traffic, 45 minutes that I usually spent reviewing my notes from the previous shift or simply staring out the window and trying to mentally prepare for whatever the day would bring. Working in the pediatric intensive care unit was emotionally demanding in ways that nursing school hadn't fully prepared me for, but it was also deeply meaningful work that made me feel like I was making a real difference in the world. Cleveland General Hospital was a massive complex of buildings connected by covered walkways, serving a diverse population that ranged from wealthy suburban families to inner-city residents who relied on Medicaid and emergency services. The pediatric wing was on the 4th floor, painted in cheerful colors that were supposed to be comforting to sick children and their families, with murals of cartoon animals and inspirational quotes about hope and healing. My shift started at 7 a.m., which meant I had exactly enough time to grab a quick cup of coffee from the nurse's station and review the charts for my assigned patients. Today, I was responsible for 6 children ranging in age from 18 months to 14 years, each dealing with serious medical conditions that required constant monitoring and specialized care. There was little Emma, 2 years old, recovering from surgery to repair a congenital heart defect. Her parents, the Kowalskis, had been at the hospital for 3 weeks, taking turns sleeping in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside her bed and surviving on vending machine food and the kindness of the nursing staff. Mrs. Kowalski had the hollow-eyed look of a mother whose world had been turned upside down, and I recognized something of myself in her fierce protectiveness and barely contained panic. Down the hall was Marcus, age 8, battling leukemia with the kind of courage that made grown-ups cry and question everything they thought they knew about strength. His grandmother, who had custody of him while his mother struggled with addiction, came every day after her shift at the grocery store where she worked as a cashier. She would sit beside his bed, reading stories and helping him with homework, her weathered hands gentle as she smoothed his blanket or adjusted his pillows. Each family I encountered was dealing with their own version of crisis, their own fears and hopes and desperate love for children whose lives hung in the balance. It was impossible to do this job without being constantly reminded of how fragile everything was, how quickly a normal life could be shattered by illness or accident, how much parents would sacrifice for their children's well-being. The work was physically demanding, requiring 12-hour shifts on my feet, constantly moving between rooms, monitoring vital signs, administering medications, and providing emotional support to families who were living through their worst nightmares. But it was also intellectually challenging in ways that engaged every part of my brain and made me feel like I was using my education and skills to their fullest potential. During my lunch break, I called the school to check on Maya, a habit I'd developed after she'd had a particularly difficult day a few weeks earlier. The school secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, knew me by name now and always spoke kindly when I called. "Maya's having a good day today, Mrs. Martinez," she assured me.
I saw her at recess and she was playing with her friends, no problems at all. Relief flooded through me, the kind of relief only parents understand. Maya had been struggling with some behavioral issues at school lately, nothing serious, but enough to concern her teacher and prompt several phone calls that had left me wondering if I was failing as a mother. The guilt was constant and exhausting, the feeling that I should somehow be doing more, being more present, providing more stability despite the limitations of our circumstances. The afternoon brought a new admission to our unit, a 6-year-old girl named Sarah who had been in a car accident and sustained serious injuries. Her parents, the Andersons, arrived looking shock-shelled and terrified, clutching each other and asking the same questions over and over. Would she be okay? What could they do? How long would recovery take? I spent an hour with them, explaining the medical equipment, the treatment plan, and the resources available to families during extended hospital stays. Mrs. Anderson broke down crying when I mentioned the family lounge where parents could sleep, and I realized they were probably wondering how they would manage the financial burden of staying near the hospital while their daughter recovered. There are social services available, I told them gently. Financial assistance programs, meal vouchers, support groups for families going through similar situations. You don't have to figure this out alone. By the time my shift ended at 7 p.m., I was emotionally and physically drained, but also filled with the sense of purpose that made all the challenges worthwhile. I changed out of my scrubs in the hospital locker room, checking my phone for messages, and finding a text from Mrs. Chen, the woman who ran the after-school program where Maya spent her afternoons. Maya had a great day today. She finished all her homework and helped with the younger kids during craft time. See you at pickup. The after-school program was housed in the basement of a community center, 8 blocks from Maya's school, a safe, supervised environment where working parents could leave their children until 6:30 p.m. It cost $60 a week, money that was always tight in our budget, but it was infinitely better than the alternatives and gave me peace of mind knowing that Maya was cared for during the gap between school ending and my shift finishing. When I arrived to pick up Maya, I found her curled up in the reading corner with a picture book, her backpack neatly placed beside her chair, and her jacket folded on top. She looked up when she saw me, her face lighting up with the pure joy that children reserve for their parents, and I felt the familiar tug of love mixed with exhaustion that defined my daily experience of motherhood. "How was your day, baby?" I asked as we walked to the bus stop, her hand tucked securely in mine. "Good! We learned about fractions and math, and I got all the problems right. And at recess, Samantha and I played on the swings and talked about our families." She paused, looking up at me with an expression that was more serious than I expected. "Samantha's mom doesn't work. She picks her up from school every day, and they go get ice cream sometimes." The comment hit me like a physical blow, not because Maya was being intentionally hurtful, but because it highlighted the trade-offs that defined our life. I worked long hours to provide for us, but that meant missing school pickup, missing afternoon snacks, missing the small daily moments that other mothers took for granted. "That sounds really nice," I said carefully. "Different families work in different ways. I work at the hospital to take care of sick children and to make sure we have everything we need." Maya nodded, but I could see her processing this information in the way that children do, trying to understand why her life looked different from her friends' lives, why her mother wasn't available for ice cream runs and afternoon playdates. The guilt twisted in my stomach, sharp and familiar, the constant companion of working mothers everywhere. On the bus ride home, Maya fell asleep against my shoulder, her small body finally relaxing after a long day. I looked down at her peaceful face and felt the fierce, protective love that had driven every major decision I'd made since the day she was born. Every sacrifice, every long hour, every moment of exhaustion was worth it for this little girl who depended on me completely. But I also wondered, not for the first time, if my efforts were enough, If the love I felt so deeply was translating into the kind of childhood Maya deserved, if the choices I was making out of necessity would eventually be understood or forgiven. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 years had passed since those early days of struggling to balance work and motherhood, and on the surface, things had improved dramatically. We'd moved to a better apartment in Lakewood, a suburb with tree-lined streets, and a highly rated elementary school district. I'd been promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric ICU, which came with a significant salary increase, and the respect of my colleagues who had watched me work my way up from a new graduate to a trusted leader. Maya, now 10 years old, had her own bedroom painted in the soft lavender she'd chosen herself, complete with a proper desk for homework and bookshelves lined with the chapter books she devoured with an appetite that reminded me of myself at her age. We had a reliable car, a used Honda Civic that got us where we needed to go without the constant anxiety of breakdowns and repair bills that had plagued our earlier years. But success had brought its own set of challenges, ones I hadn't anticipated when I was focused solely on climbing out of poverty. The better job meant longer hours and more responsibility, emergency calls that pulled me back to the hospital during off hours, medical conferences that required weekend travel, and the emotional weight of making life and death decisions that followed me home no matter how hard I tried to leave work at work. It was a Tuesday evening in November when the first real crack in our relationship became visible. I'd been called in for an emergency surgery consultation involving an 8-year-old boy who'd been hit by a car, and by the time I made it home, it was nearly 9 p.m. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with her math homework spread out in front of her, her face streaked with tears of frustration. "I don't understand any of this," she said without looking up when I walked through the door. "Mrs. Patterson tried to help me, but she doesn't know about fractions either." Mrs. Patterson was our elderly neighbor who had agreed to watch Maya in emergencies, a kind woman who did her best but couldn't fill the gap that my absence had created. I looked at the worksheet covered in eraser marks and Maya's increasingly frantic attempts to solve problems that should have been straightforward for a child of her intelligence.
"I'm so sorry, baby. There was an emergency at the hospital, and I got here as fast as I could." I sat down beside her, quickly scanning the problems and realizing that she'd missed a key concept that had probably been explained during the math lesson I'd promised to help her review the night before. "You're always sorry," Maya said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that I'd never heard before. "And you're always at the hospital. Samantha's mom helped her with her math homework yesterday, and today, and probably tomorrow, too." The comparison stung because it was true. Samantha's mother, Jennifer, was married to a successful accountant and had the luxury of being a stay-at-home mom who volunteered at school events, organized playdates, and was always available for homework help and emotional support. It was a life I envied deeply, but couldn't replicate given our circumstances. "Maya, you know why I work so hard. Everything I do is for you, to make sure you have opportunities that I never had." I kept my voice gentle, but I could feel my own frustration building. After a 14-hour day dealing with life and death situations, coming home to attitude and accusations felt monumentally unfair. I don't care about opportunities. I care about having a mom who's actually here. She slammed her pencil down on the table and crossed her arms, her dark eyes flashing with anger that seemed too mature for her 10-year-old face. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were intended to hurt, but because they articulated a fear I'd been carrying for years. Was my devotion to providing for Maya actually depriving her of the one thing she needed most? My presence. Was I so focused on giving her a better life that I was missing her actual childhood?
We worked through the math problems together in tense silence, and I tucked her into bed with the usual routine of stories and kisses, but something fundamental had shifted between us. For the first time, Maya had articulated her resentment clearly, and I had no idea how to address it without compromising the financial stability that allowed us to live in this safe neighborhood with good schools and opportunities. The next few months brought a series of similar incidents, each one highlighting the growing distance between us. Maya's school called to say she'd been acting out in class, talking back to teachers and showing defiance that was completely unlike her previous behavior. When I tried to discuss it with her, she shut down, giving me monosyllabic answers and avoiding eye contact. Parent-teacher conferences became exercises in guilt and frustration. Maya's teacher, Mrs. Kim, was diplomatic but clear in her concerns about Maya's emotional state. She's obviously very bright and her academic performance is excellent, but she seems angry about something. She's mentioned feeling like she has to take care of herself because her mother is always working. I sat in the tiny plastic chair designed for elementary students, feeling like I was being judged and found wanting by a woman who probably had no idea what it was like to be solely responsible for another human being's welfare. "I'm doing the best I can," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "My job is demanding, but it provides for us. Maya has everything she needs." "She has material needs met," Mrs. Kim agreed carefully. "But children also need emotional availability, consistent presence, someone who can be there for the small moments that feel big to them." The comment stayed with me for weeks, echoing in my mind during late-night feedings for premature babies and emergency interventions for critically ill children. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days providing compassionate care for other people's children, while my own daughter felt neglected and unsupported. Spring brought Maya's participation in the school science fair, a project she'd been working on for months involving plant growth and different types of soil. She'd been excited about it initially, designing experiments and recording data with a kind of methodical attention to detail that reminded me of myself. But as the presentation date approached, her enthusiasm waned. "All the other parents are helping with the display boards," she mentioned casually one evening when I was reviewing work emails on my laptop. "Samantha's mom is taking her to the art store tomorrow to buy poster board and fancy markers." I looked up from my screen, realizing that I'd been so focused on work that I hadn't been tracking the timeline for Maya's project. "We can go this weekend," I offered. But even as I said it, I remembered that I was on call Saturday and had already committed to covering a shift for a colleague on Sunday. "Never mind," Maya said, her voice flat with resignation. "I'll just use cardboard and regular markers. It's fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. When the science fair arrived, Maya's project was competent, but clearly homemade, lacking the polished presentation boards and professional printing that characterized many of her classmates' displays. She stood beside her table with a forced smile, answering judges' questions competently, but without the enthusiasm that had originally driven her interest in the subject. I managed to attend the evening presentation, arriving straight from the hospital, still wearing my scrubs and carrying the lingering stress of a particularly difficult day. Maya's face lit up when she saw me, but I could also see her taking in my appearance and comparing it to the other parents who had clearly prepared for the event. "Your project is wonderful," I told her genuinely, examining her data charts and experimental methodology. "You did such careful work with your observations." "Thanks," she said, but there was something subdued in her response. Mrs. Chen's mom brought her a whole photography setup to document her experiment, and Jake's dad helped him build a working model. The comparisons were becoming a constant theme in our conversations, and each one felt like an accusation I couldn't defend against. I was working harder than I'd ever worked, achieving professional success that should have made me proud, but instead feeling like I was failing at the thing that mattered most. The breaking point came during Maya's 11th birthday party. I'd planned what I thought was a special celebration, dinner at her favorite restaurant followed by a movie she'd been wanting to see. Just the two of us, a mother-daughter evening that would show her how much she meant to me. But 20 minutes before we were supposed to leave, my phone rang with an emergency from the hospital. A 6-year-old patient had taken a sudden turn for the worst, and as the charge nurse, I was needed immediately to coordinate the response team and support the family through what could be their child's final hours. I stared at Maya, who was dressed in her favorite dress and had spent an hour carefully styling her hair for our special evening. Her face went through a series of expressions: disappointment, anger, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance that was heartbreaking to witness. "You have to go," she said. And it wasn't a question. At 11 years old, she had already learned that my job would always come first, that sick children I barely knew would always take priority over her needs and feelings. "Maya, I'm so sorry. This is a life or death situation. I'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll do something even better this weekend." She nodded and went to her room to change out of her party dress, and I left for the hospital carrying the weight of yet another broken promise, another moment of her childhood that I'd missed for the sake of professional responsibility. That night, after spending 4 hours helping save a little boy's life and supporting his grateful parents through their crisis, I came home to find Maya asleep with her birthday gifts unopened on her dresser. I sat on the edge of her bed, watching her sleep, overwhelmed by love and guilt in equal measure. I was providing for her, protecting her future, building a career that would ensure she never experienced the financial insecurity that had defined my own childhood. But in the process, I was missing her present, failing to be the constant, available mother she needed and deserved. The worst part was that I didn't know how to fix it without sacrificing everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. The job that took me away from Maya was also the job that gave her opportunities, stability, and security. The career that made me unavailable was also the career that had lifted us out of poverty and into a life where Maya could dream bigger than I'd ever been able to dream. As I tucked the blankets around her sleeping form and kissed her forehead gently, I wondered if she would ever understand the impossible choices that defined single motherhood, or if she would only remember the missed moments and broken promises that seemed to accumulate despite my best intentions. Middle school arrived like a storm system I should have seen coming, but somehow wasn't prepared for. Maya, now 12, walked into Lincoln Middle School with the kind of confidence that came from being academically gifted and socially aware, but also carrying an anger that had been simmering for months. The transition from elementary school brought new freedoms, new influences, and, unfortunately, new ways for our relationship to deteriorate. The first sign of trouble came during the second week of 7th grade, when I received a call from the assistant principal, Mr. Davidson. Maya had been caught skipping her afternoon classes and was found in the parking lot with a group of 8th graders who were known for pushing boundaries. "This is completely unlike Maya," Mr. Davidson assured me over the phone, while I stood in the hospital supply closet trying to have a private conversation during my lunch break. "Her academic performance is still excellent, but her behavior has become concerning. She seems angry about something, and she's starting to gravitate towards students who aren't making good choices." I scheduled a meeting for the following week, which meant rearranging my schedule and asking a colleague to cover part of my shift. When I arrived at the school, Maya was sitting in the main office, looking defiant rather than embarrassed, her arms crossed and her jaw set in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of my own teenage rebellion. "Maya, what's going on?" I asked as we walked to Mr. Davidson's office. "Skipping class isn't like you at all." "Maybe you don't know what I'm like anymore," she replied, her voice carrying a sharp edge that cut straight through my heart. "You're never around long enough to find out." The meeting was a blur of educational jargon and behavior plans, but what stuck with me was Maya's stony silence throughout the entire discussion. When Mr. Davidson asked her to explain her actions, she simply shrugged and said, "I was bored. The other kids seemed more interesting than sitting in English class talking about books." That evening, I tried to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Maya about her choices and the importance of education, but she shut down completely. She sat at the kitchen table doing homework with earbuds in, effectively blocking me out, despite being in the same room. When I asked her to remove them so we could talk, she complied, but answered every question with monosyllables. "Are you upset about something specific?" I asked, sitting across from her at the table where we'd once worked on math problems together. "Nope." "Is there anything you want to talk about? School, friends, anything?" "Nope." "Maya, I know something is bothering you. I'm your mother, and I can tell when you're struggling with something."
She looked up from her homework then, and the anger in her eyes was so intense it took my breath away. "You want to know what's bothering me? You are. You're bothering me. You show up for parent conferences and disciplinary meetings, but you miss everything that actually matters. You don't know my friends. You don't know what classes I like. You don't even know that I hate the lunches you pack because you buy the cheapest everything." The criticism was brutal in its specificity and accuracy. I had been so focused on the big picture, her education, her future opportunities, our financial stability, that I lost track of the daily details that made up her actual lived experience. "I'm doing my best, Maya. I work hard to provide for us to make sure you have opportunities." "I don't want opportunities," she interrupted, her voice rising. "I want a mom who actually knows me. Samantha's mom knows that she's scared of thunderstorms and that she likes her sandwiches cut diagonally and that her favorite color changed from purple to green last month. You don't even know that I stopped liking peanut butter 2 years ago." The conversation ended with Maya storming to her room and slamming the door, leaving me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of my good intentions, her completed homework, her healthy lunch for tomorrow, her clean clothes folded and ready for the morning, all the practical aspects of motherhood that I'd focused on, while somehow missing the emotional connection that actually mattered to her. The next few months brought a series of escalating incidents that made it clear Maya's rebellion was just beginning. There was the day I came home to find her room redecorated with posters of bands I'd never heard of, and her previously neat space transformed into deliberate chaos. There was the phone call from her English teacher reporting that Maya had turned in an essay about the emotional absence of working mothers. That was technically excellent, but clearly a pointed criticism of our relationship. Most challenging was the emergence of new friendships with kids whose names I didn't recognize and whose parents I never met. Maya started asking to go to houses where I couldn't verify supervision, to events that seemed vague and poorly planned with teenagers who seemed to have unlimited freedom and minimal parental oversight. "I want to go to Jessica's house on Friday night," Maya announced one evening while I was reviewing patient charts at the kitchen table. "Her parents are out of town, but her older sister will be there." "Absolutely not," I said without looking up from my work. "You're not going to an unsupervised party with kids I don't know." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she exploded. "You don't trust me to make good decisions, but you're never around to actually see what kind of decisions I make. You just assume I'm going to mess up because that's easier than actually paying attention to who I am." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. I was operating from a place of protective fear rather than informed trust, making decisions based on worst-case scenarios rather than Maya's actual demonstrated judgment. "I do trust you, Maya, but I don't trust the situation. Overnight parties with minimal supervision is where bad things happen, and I won't put you in that position." "Fine, but don't pretend this is about protecting me. This is about controlling me because you feel guilty about never being here." She was right, and we both knew it. My parenting had become increasingly authoritarian as my availability decreased, relying on rules and restrictions rather than relationship and communication. I was trying to parent from a distance through prohibition rather than guidance, and Maya was smart enough to recognize the difference. The situation came to a head during Maya's 13th birthday, an event I was determined to handle better than the previous year's disaster. I took the entire day off work, planned a party with her closest friends, and arranged for activities I thought she would enjoy. But when the day arrived, Maya seemed distant and unimpressed by my efforts. "This is really nice, Mom," she said politely as we set up decorations in our living room. "Thank you for taking the day off."
But her tone was formal, like she was thanking a helpful stranger rather than celebrating with someone she loved. The enthusiasm I remembered from her younger years was gone, replaced by a kind of resigned appreciation that felt worse than open hostility. The party itself was successful in all the measurable ways. Her friends seemed to have fun, the cake was delicious, and the gifts were well received. But I watched Maya throughout the afternoon and saw her performing the role of happy birthday girl rather than actually experiencing joy. She laughed at the right moments, expressed appropriate gratitude, and posed for pictures with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After her friends left and we were cleaning up together, I tried to address what I was sensing. "Did you have a good time today? It seemed like a successful party." "It was great, Maya," she said, gathering wrapping paper into a trash bag. "Really, Mom, you did a good job." "Maya, you don't sound like you mean that." She stopped cleaning and looked at me directly, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen before, a kind of sad resignation that seemed far too mature for a 13-year-old.
"I do mean it. You took the day off work, which I know was hard for you. You planned everything carefully, and my friends had fun. You did exactly what a good mother is supposed to do. But it felt like you were checking off a box on a list rather than celebrating with me. Like you were fulfilling an obligation rather than enjoying my birthday." The observation was painfully accurate. I had approached her birthday like a project to be managed successfully rather than a moment to be savored together. Even my day off felt rushed and task-oriented, driven by guilt and determination rather than genuine joy in her company. That night, after Maya went to bed, I found myself looking through photo albums from her early childhood. There were pictures of us at parks and playgrounds, Maya's face lit up with genuine happiness, and my own expression relaxed and present. We looked like we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, like we were partners in the adventure of her childhood, rather than adversaries negotiating the terms of our relationship. Somewhere along the way, in my focus on providing for her future, I'd lost the ability to be present for her now. The loving, attentive mother I'd been when we had less money and more time together had been replaced by someone who showed love through achievement and provision, rather than attention and availability. The realization was devastating, because I could see the pattern so clearly, but had no idea how to break it without sacrificing the financial security that had taken years to build. My job wasn't just work, it was my identity, my contribution to the world, and the foundation of everything I'd worked to create for both of us. But Maya didn't need financial security as much as she needed emotional security, and I was failing to provide the thing she actually wanted while excelling at providing things she didn't ask for. As I closed the photo album and prepared for another early morning at the hospital, I wondered if 13 years old was too late to rebuild a relationship that seemed to be slipping away, despite my best intentions. Maya was becoming someone I didn't fully recognize, and I was becoming someone she didn't fully respect, and neither of us seemed to know how to bridge the growing distance between us. Maya's freshman year of high school marked the beginning of what I can only describe as open warfare between us. At 14, she had developed a sharp intelligence that she wielded like a weapon, combined with a teenager's natural ability to find the most vulnerable spots in any argument. Our house became a battlefield where every conversation had the potential to explode into accusations and hurt feelings. The morning of her first day at Roosevelt High School, I found her in the kitchen wearing an outfit that clearly violated the dress code. A crop top that showed her midriff and ripped jeans that had more holes than fabric. Her dark hair, which had always been long and carefully maintained, was now dyed with purple streaks and styled in deliberately messy waves. "Maya, you need to change before school," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "That outfit isn't appropriate for a learning environment." She looked up from her cereal bowl with an expression of exaggerated innocence. "What's wrong with it? It's just clothes." "The crop top violates dress code, and those jeans are inappropriate for school. You know this."
Actually, I don't know this, because you never bothered to go over the dress code with me. I had to figure it out myself, just like everything else. She stood up and grabbed her backpack, deliberately bumping my shoulder as she passed. But don't worry, I'll change. Wouldn't want to embarrass you by getting sent home on my first day. The sarcasm in her voice was so thick it was almost visible, and I felt the familiar combination of hurt and frustration that had become the dominant emotion in our relationship. Everything I said was interpreted as criticism or control, and every attempt to parent her was met with accusations about my failures as a mother. Maya, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to help you start high school on the right foot. No, you're trying to manage me, like one of your hospital projects. Make sure I look acceptable, follow all the rules, don't cause any problems that might reflect badly on you. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, turning back to face me. The difference is, your patients actually want your help. She disappeared upstairs to change, leaving me standing in the kitchen, feeling like I'd been physically slapped. The comparison to my patients was particularly cruel because it highlighted the irony that had begun to consume my thoughts. I could provide compassionate and effective care to complete strangers while failing completely to connect with my own daughter. When Maya came back downstairs, wearing clothes that met the dress code, she was still radiating anger and resentment. The car ride to school was silent except for the aggressive music she played through her headphones, loud enough that I could hear the angry lyrics bleeding through. "Have a good first day," I said as she got out of the car. "I'll pick you up after your orientation meeting. Don't bother. I'll find my own way home." She slammed the car door and walked toward the school building without looking back, her posture radiating the kind of confident defiance that made my stomach clench with worry. That afternoon, she kept her word and arrived home 3 hours after school ended, offering no explanation for where she'd been or how she'd gotten there. When I tried to ask about her first day, she gave me the same monosyllabic responses that had become her standard communication style. "How were your classes? Fine. Did you meet any nice people? Sure.
Maya, I'm trying to show interest in your life. Can you please give me more than one-word answers?" She looked up from her phone then, and the expression on her face was pure exhaustion mixed with disgust. "You want to show interest in my life? Here's my life. I sit in classes all day, learning things you never ask me about. I eat lunch with people you've never met and wouldn't approve of if you did. I walk through hallways full of kids whose parents actually know them, and I pretend I don't care that my mother is a stranger who happens to pay my bills." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to inflict maximum damage, and they succeeded completely. I felt tears stinging my eyes and had to turn away to compose myself before responding. "That's not fair, Maya. I work hard to provide for us, to make sure you have opportunities. Stop saying that." Her voice rose to a shout. "Stop hiding behind opportunities and providing like that excuses everything. I don't need opportunities. I need a mother who actually wants to spend time with me instead of constantly looking for excuses to escape to work." The accusation that I was escaping to work rather than being called away by necessity hit particularly hard because there was some truth to it. Work had become my refuge from the constant conflict at home, the place where I felt competent and appreciated instead of criticized and resented. "I don't escape to work," I said, but even as I said it, I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "Really? Because you volunteer for extra shifts, you attend conferences that aren't required, you stay late for meetings that could probably happen during regular hours. Face it, Mom, work is where you're happy, and home is where you have to deal with me." The conversation ended with Maya going to her room and turning her music up loud enough to rattle the walls, and me sitting at the kitchen table, wondering how we'd gotten to a place where my own daughter saw me as someone who actively avoided her company. The pattern established during that first week of high school continued throughout the fall semester.
Maya's grades remained excellent. She was too smart and too prideful to let academic performance slip, but everything else about her behavior became increasingly concerning. She started wearing heavy makeup that made her look older and more sophisticated, hanging out with kids whose names I recognized from disciplinary reports that occasionally crossed my desk at parent volunteer meetings. Most troubling was her relationship with a boy named Derek, a 16-year-old sophomore who had already been suspended twice and had the kind of reputation that made other parents warn their children to stay away. Maya was clearly infatuated with him, and he seemed to enjoy the power that came from dating someone younger and more naive than his usual crowd. "I don't want you spending time with Derek outside of school," I told Maya one evening after seeing them together in the parking lot when I picked her up from drama club practice. "Why not? You don't even know him." "I know enough. He's 2 years older than you, he has a reputation for getting into trouble, and you're too young to be in a serious relationship." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Serious relationship? I'm 14, Mom. I'm not planning to marry him, but he's the first person in years who actually seems to enjoy my company, so forgive me if I don't want to give that up because you're paranoid about teenage boys." The comment about enjoying her company was another direct hit, highlighting the fact that our relationship had become so strained that she found more acceptance and affection from a troublemaker boyfriend than from her own mother. "Maya, I enjoy your company. We just seem to disagree about everything lately." "We disagree about everything because you've decided I'm a problem to be solved instead of a person to be known. Derek talks to me about books and music and what I think about things. He asks my opinion and actually listens to my answers. When's the last time you did that?" I tried to remember the last time I'd asked Maya about her thoughts on something beyond homework and household rules, and realized I couldn't. Our conversations had become entirely functional. Logistics about schedules, reminders about responsibilities, corrections about behavior. We'd stopped talking about ideas, dreams, or feelings somewhere along the way. The situation with Derek came to a head in November when Maya asked permission to go to a party at his house. When I said no, she went anyway, leaving a note saying she'd be back by midnight and that she was old enough to make her own decisions about her social life. I spent the evening pacing our living room, alternating between fury and terror, calling her phone repeatedly, and getting only voicemail. When she finally came home at 12:30 a.m., she was clearly drunk, stumbling slightly as she tried to walk quietly through the front door. "Maya Elizabeth Martinez, what the hell are you think you're doing?" I confronted her in the hallway, taking in her disheveled appearance and the smell of alcohol on her breath. "She's coming home," she said, trying to sound sober and dignified but failing completely. "You're drunk. You're 14 years old, and you're drunk at a party I specifically told you not to attend." "I had like 2 beers. It's not a big deal. Everyone drinks at parties." "It is a big deal. You deliberately disobeyed me. You put yourself in a dangerous situation, and you're too young to be drinking alcohol. We're going to have a serious conversation about this in the morning when you're sober."
Maya rolled her eyes and started toward the stairs. Great. Another lecture about responsibility and making good choices from someone who's never around to see what choices I actually make. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you." She turned back then, and the look on her face was pure defiance mixed with hurt that was so deep it took my breath away. "You want to talk now? Now you want to have conversations and set boundaries and be involved in my life? Where was all this energy when I was 10 and begging you to help with homework? Where was it when I was 12 and needed someone to talk to about boys and friendships? You can't just show up for the dramatic moments and expect me to pretend you've been here all along." She went upstairs, and I heard her bedroom door close with deliberate control rather than slamming, which somehow felt worse than teenage dramatics. The restraint suggested that she was past the point of emotional reaction and had moved into cold assessment of our relationship. The next morning brought a conversation that I'd been dreading but knew was inevitable. Maya came downstairs looking pale and subdued, clearly feeling the effects of her first real hangover, and I could see that some of her defiance had been replaced by genuine regret. "Maya, we need to talk about last night," I began, sitting across from her at the beach and table. "I know. I'm sorry I drank, and I'm sorry I came home late."
It won't happen again. I'm glad you're sorry, but we need to talk about more than just last night. We need to talk about what's happening between us because this pattern of conflict and disobedience can't continue. She looked up from her coffee mug and I could see that she was fighting back tears. I don't know how to fix it, Mom. I don't know how to be the daughter you want me to be, and you don't know how to be the mother I need you to be. Maybe we're just not compatible anymore. The statement was delivered with such matter-of-fact sadness that it felt like a diagnosis rather than an accusation. Maya wasn't being dramatic or manipulative. She was simply stating what felt like an inevitable conclusion about our relationship. Maya, that's not true. We can fix this. We just need to figure out how to communicate better, how to spend more time together. Mom, stop. Just stop. She held up her hand to interrupt me. You've been saying that for years, but nothing ever changes. You keep promising to be more available, more present, more involved, but then work calls and you disappear again. I'm tired of hoping you'll change, and I'm tired of being disappointed when you don't. The conversation ended with both of us crying, but not the kind of crying that brings resolution or catharsis. It was the crying that comes from recognizing that love isn't enough to bridge fundamental incompatibilities, that good intentions can't repair years of accumulated hurt and resentment. As Maya went upstairs to get ready for school, and I prepared for another day at the hospital, I realized that we had reached a point of no return in our relationship. She had stopped believing that I could change, and I had stopped believing that I could be the mother she needed without sacrificing everything I'd worked to build for both of us. The spring of Maya's sophomore year brought an opportunity that would have seemed like a dream come true just a few years earlier. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the chief of pediatric medicine at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, personally recruited me for a position as director of pediatric nursing. It was a prestigious role that came with a substantial salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and the chance to shape pediatric nursing protocols for one of the most respected children's hospitals in the country. The offer arrived on a Tuesday morning via a phone call that interrupted my coffee break between patient rounds. Dr. Warren's voice carried the kind of authority and warmth that made it clear why she was considered a leader in her field. Rebecca, I've been following your work at Cleveland General for several years. Your innovations in family-centered care and your leadership during crisis situations have been exceptional. We need someone with your expertise to lead our nursing department into the next decade. I listened to her describe the position, the research opportunities, the chance to mentor nursing students, and implement cutting-edge protocols. Everything about the opportunity aligned with my professional goals and represented recognition for the career I'd built through years of sacrifice and dedication. The position would require relocation to Cincinnati. I understand that's a significant consideration, especially with a teenage daughter. But I want you to know that we're prepared to offer a very competitive compensation package and assistance with relocation expenses. When I hung up the phone, my first emotion was pure excitement. This was the kind of career advancement that most nurses only dreamed of, the culmination of everything I'd worked towards since graduating from nursing school. But the excitement was quickly followed by a sinking realization of what this opportunity would mean for Maya and our already fragile relationship. That evening, I approached the subject carefully, waiting until after dinner when Maya was doing homework at the kitchen table. She was working on a chemistry assignment, her brow furrowed in concentration, purple hair falling across her face as she calculated molecular formulas. Maya, I need to talk to you about something important, I began, sitting down across from her. She looked up with the wariness that had become her default expression whenever I initiated serious conversations. What now? I received a job offer today, a really significant opportunity that could advance my career in ways I never imagined possible. Congratulations, she said flatly, returning her attention to her homework. I'm sure you deserve it.
The position is at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. It would mean moving to Ohio. Her pencil stopped moving across the paper, and she slowly raised her head to look at me. The expression on her face went through several stages: surprise, understanding, and finally a kind of bitter resignation that was heartbreaking to witness. Of course it would, she said quietly. Of course your big break would require us to move away from everything I've ever known. Maya, this isn't about hurting you. This is about opportunities for both of us. Cincinnati has excellent schools, and the salary increase would mean we could afford a nicer house, better neighborhoods. Stop! Her voice was sharp enough to cut through my explanation. Just stop pretending this is about me. This is about your career, your opportunities, your dreams. I'm just something you have to figure out how to transport along with your furniture. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. In my excitement about the professional recognition, I had been thinking of Maya as a logistical consideration rather than a person whose entire life would be disrupted by my decision. That's not fair. Everything I do is for your benefit. This position would give us financial security that would set you up for college, for your future. I don't want financial security in Cincinnati, Maya said, her voice rising. I want to stay here, in the only home I've ever known, with the few friends I've managed to make despite having a mother who treats social connections like inconvenient distractions. She stood up from the table, gathering her homework with sharp, angry movements. But it doesn't matter what I want, does it? It never has. You're going to take this job because it's good for your career, and you'll find a way to convince yourself that uprooting my entire life is actually good for me too. Maya, we can discuss this. This decision affects both of us, and I want your input. No, you don't. She turned to face me, and the pain in her eyes was so raw, it was almost unbearable to look at. You want my compliance. You want me to be grateful for opportunities I never ask for and excited about changes I don't want. But you don't actually want my input, because if you did, you'd already know that the answer is no. She left the kitchen and went to her room, leaving me sitting alone at the table with the weight of a decision that suddenly felt impossible. The opportunity represented everything I'd worked toward professionally, but accepting it would mean forcing Maya to abandon the fragile stability she had managed to create in her teenage social world. Over the next week, I found myself seeking advice from colleagues, friends, and even Maya's school counselor, trying to find someone who could help me navigate this impossible choice. The consensus was remarkably consistent. Opportunities like this didn't come along often, and I shouldn't let teenage resistance prevent me from advancing my career. She's 15, my supervisor at Cleveland General pointed out. She'll adapt to the move much easier than you think. Teenagers are resilient, and she'll make new friends quickly. Maya's a bright girl, echoed her guidance counselor. She'll understand eventually that this move is in her best interest, even if she can't see it now. But none of these well-meaning advisors had witnessed the depth of Maya's resentment toward me or understood how this move would confirm every accusation she'd ever made about my priorities. To her, accepting this position would be the ultimate proof that my career mattered more than her happiness, that my dreams were more important than her stability. The decision deadline arrived faster than I wanted it to, and I found myself sitting in Dr. Warren's office in Cincinnati, touring the facilities and meeting the nursing staff who would become my colleagues. The hospital was impressive in every way: state-of-the-art equipment, collaborative work environment, and a mission that aligned perfectly with my values about family-centered care. I can see you're conflicted about something, Dr. Warren observed as we concluded the formal interview process. Is there anything about the position that concerns you? It's not the position, I admitted. It's the impact on my daughter. She's 15, and this move would disrupt her entire social world at a crucial time in her development. I understand that concern, Dr. Warren nodded thoughtfully. I went through something similar when my daughter was in high school, but I've learned that children are often more adaptable than we give them credit for, and sometimes the best thing we can do for them is model the importance of pursuing excellence in our work. Her words resonated with something deep in my professional identity, the belief that hard work and dedication should be rewarded, that opportunities for advancement shouldn't be sacrificed for comfort or convenience. I accepted the position that afternoon, signing contracts that would change both of our lives irrevocably. When I returned home and told Maya about my decision, her reaction was worse than I had anticipated. There was no yelling, no dramatic protests, just a quiet acceptance that felt like watching someone's spirit break in real time. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "At the end of the school year. You'll be able to finish sophomore year here, and we'll have the summer to get settled before you start junior year in Cincinnati." She nodded slowly as if processing information that didn't really concern her. "I see. So you've already figured out all the logistics." "Maya, I know this is hard, but I really believe this will be good for both of us in the long run." "Mom, stop. Please just stop trying to convince me that this is good for me.
You made the decision that was right for your career, and I understand that, but don't insult my intelligence by pretending you considered my feelings when you made it.
The conversation ended there, but the aftermath was somehow worse than the conflict had been. Maya didn't fight the decision or try to negotiate alternatives. Instead, she seemed to withdraw into herself, going through the motions of daily life with a kind of mechanical compliance that felt like emotional death. She stopped bringing friends home, stopped asking permission for social activities, stopped seeking my approval or attention in any meaningful way. When I tried to engage her in conversations about the move, asking about what kind of room she wanted in our new house, what activities she might want to pursue in Cincinnati, she responded with polite disinterest, as if I were discussing someone else's life. The most painful part was watching her begin to emotionally detach from our relationship entirely. She started referring to me as Rebecca instead of Mom when talking to other people, a small change that felt like a massive rejection. She began making plans for her future that conspicuously excluded any need for my support or involvement. I'm going to apply for early admission to colleges that offer full scholarships, she mentioned casually one evening while we were eating dinner in our usual silence. That way I can be financially independent as soon as possible. The comment was delivered without malice or dramatic emphasis, but it hit me like a physical blow. My 15-year-old daughter was already planning her escape from our relationship, calculating how quickly she could become self-sufficient enough to cut me out of her life entirely. Maya, college is still 3 years away. We don't need to rush into decisions about financial independence. Actually, we do, because I've learned that I can't depend on you to consider my needs when you make decisions about our lives, so I need to make sure I can take care of myself as soon as legally possible. The remainder of our time in Cleveland passed in a blur of packing, paperwork, and increasingly formal interactions between us. Maya helped with the logistics of moving without complaint, but she approached the process like a hired assistant rather than a daughter preparing for a family transition. On our last night in the apartment where Maya had spent most of her childhood, I found her sitting in her empty room surrounded by boxes and looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had in years. "Are you okay?" I asked, sitting down on the floor beside her. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just thinking about how different everything is going to be." Different doesn't have to mean bad. This could be a fresh start for both of us, a chance to build something better together. She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to seek comfort in my presence when the world felt overwhelming. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by the careful emotional distance she'd learned to maintain. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but probably not." As we drove away from Cleveland the next morning, I watched Maya stare out the window at the familiar neighborhoods and landmarks disappearing behind us. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture suggested someone who was grieving a loss that couldn't be recovered. I had achieved everything I'd worked toward professionally, secured opportunities that would define the rest of my career, and provided financial advantages that would benefit Maya for years to come. But sitting in that car, watching my daughter say goodbye to her childhood home, I wondered if I had won the battle while losing the war that actually mattered. Cincinnati was supposed to be our fresh start, but it quickly became clear that changing our location hadn't changed the fundamental dynamics of our relationship. If anything, removing Maya from her familiar environment had only deepened her resentment and accelerated her emotional withdrawal from our family unit of two. Our new house was everything I had promised, a 3-bedroom colonial in a safe suburban neighborhood with excellent schools and tree-lined streets that looked like something from a magazine. Maya's room was twice the size of her old one, with large windows that let in natural light and space for all the furniture and belongings that had been cramped in our Cleveland apartment. But she approached her new environment with the detached efficiency of someone moving into a temporary housing situation rather than a family home. She arranged her furniture, unpacked her belongings, and organized her space with careful precision, but there was no excitement, no sense of ownership or belonging. It was as if she was setting up a dormitory room that she'd be vacating as soon as legally possible. The first few weeks were consumed with practical matters, enrolling Maya at Hamilton High School, familiarizing myself with the protocols at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and navigating the logistics of building a life in a new city. Maya handled her part of these transitions with remarkable competence, researching her new school online, identifying advanced placement courses that would accelerate her path to college, and even connecting with academic clubs that aligned with her interests. I've signed up for AP Chemistry, AP English Literature, and dual enrollment calculus at the community college, she informed me over breakfast during her second week at Hamilton High. The guidance counselor says if I maintain my GPA, I'll graduate with enough college credits to enter university as a sophomore. Her tone was businesslike, as if she were briefing me on a project, rather than sharing her academic plans with her mother. Everything about her approach to high school seemed designed to minimize the time she'd need to spend dependent on me. That's ambitious, I said, trying to inject some warmth into what felt like a professional consultation. Are you sure you want to take on that much academic pressure in your first semester at a new school? Actually, we do, because I've learned that I can't depend on you to consider my needs when you make decisions about our lives, so I need to make sure I can take care of myself as soon as legally possible.
The comment was delivered without malice, but it stung nonetheless. Maya wasn't threatening to leave or expressing anger about our situation. She was simply stating her intention to extract herself from our relationship as efficiently as possible. My own transition to Cincinnati Children's Hospital was professionally everything I had hoped for. The nursing staff was exceptional, the resources were state-of-the-art, and the collaborative environment allowed me to implement family-centered care protocols that genuinely improved outcomes for pediatric patients and their families. Dr. Warren had been right about the research opportunities as well. Within my first month, I was invited to participate in a multi-site study examining the impact of nursing interventions on family stress during pediatric hospitalizations. The work was intellectually stimulating and professionally fulfilling in ways that validated every sacrifice I had made to advance my career. But the irony of my professional success wasn't lost on me. I was becoming nationally recognized for my expertise in supporting families during medical crises, while failing completely to maintain a functional relationship with my own daughter. Conference presentations about family communication and stress reduction felt increasingly hypocritical when I went home each night to a house where Maya and I barely spoke beyond logistical necessities. The pattern of our interactions became grimly predictable. I would ask about her day, her classes, her adjustment to the new school. She would provide factual responses that conveyed information without revealing anything about her emotional state or inner life. I would try to show interest in her activities and achievements, and she would acknowledge my efforts with polite appreciation that felt more distant than hostility. "How was the chemistry quiz you were studying for?" I'd ask over dinner. "I got a 98. There was one question about molecular bonding that I should have gotten right." "That's excellent. You've always been good at science." "Thank you." And that would be the extent of our communication about something that represented hours of her time and intellectual effort. She wasn't hiding her achievements from me, but she also wasn't sharing them in a way that invited connection or celebration. The worst part was watching Maya navigate the social challenges of starting over at a new school with remarkable resilience and independence. Within a few weeks, she had identified a group of academically motivated students who shared her interests in literature and science. She joined the debate team, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and even began dating a senior named Alex, who seemed genuinely nice during the brief interactions I witnessed. All of these developments happened without my involvement or input. Maya managed her social life, her academic commitments, and her extracurricular activities with the kind of self-sufficiency that should have made me proud, but instead made me feel irrelevant to her daily experience. When parent-teacher conferences arrived in October, I learned more about Maya's adjustment and personality from her teachers than I had from months of living in the same house with her. Maya is exceptional, her AP English teacher, Miss Rodriguez, told me enthusiastically. Her analysis of complex texts is sophisticated beyond her years, and she brings a unique perspective to class discussions. She's mentioned that she's interested in studying literature in college with a focus on narratives about family dynamics and generational trauma.
The information hit me like a revelation. Maya was not only thinking seriously about her academic future, but she was drawn to subjects that directly related to our own family dysfunction. She was processing our relationship intellectually and academically in ways that I had never suspected. Has she mentioned anything about adjusting to the move? I asked, hoping for insight into her emotional state. She's mentioned that this is her second high school, but she seems very focused on her goals and independent, more independent than most students her age, actually. She never asks for extensions or special accommodations, and she seems to handle stress very well. The description of Maya as unusually independent for her age was a point of pride and a source of sadness. She had learned to handle stress and manage challenges without seeking support from adults, which was a valuable life skill, but also evidence of how completely she had learned to function without depending on me. Her chemistry teacher had similar observations. Maya is one of my strongest students, but she's also one of the most self-contained. She works well with lab partners when required, but she prefers to figure things out on her own rather than asking for help. She's mentioned wanting to study biochemistry in college, possibly with a pre-med track. This was the first I had heard about Maya's interest in medicine, and the fact that I was learning about it from her teacher rather than from her directly felt like another confirmation of how completely I had been excluded from her inner life. When I tried to bring up these conversations at home, Maya responded with the same polite distance that characterized all our interactions. Your teachers are very impressed with your work. Ms. Rodriguez mentioned that you're thinking about studying literature in college. I'm considering several options. Literature is one possibility. And Mr. Patterson said you're interested in pre-med. That's a challenging path, but you certainly have the academic ability for it. I'm exploring different fields to see what interests me most. Every attempt to engage her in meaningful conversation about her future, her interests, or her goals was met with responses that were factually accurate, but emotionally empty. She wasn't being rude or defiant. She was simply treating me like a distant relative who was making polite conversation, rather than her mother who wanted to understand and support her dreams. The holiday season brought our dysfunction into sharp focus. Maya approached Christmas with the same practical efficiency she applied to everything else, creating Amazon wish list filled with books and school supplies rather than anything that suggested joy or celebration. She helped with decorating and gift wrapping without complaint, but also without enthusiasm.
On Christmas morning, she opened her presents with appropriate gratitude and gave me gifts that were thoughtful but impersonal. A nice scarf, a book about pediatric nursing that she'd probably researched online. Everything about the exchange felt like we were playing the roles of mother and daughter, rather than actually being a family. "This is beautiful," I said, examining the silver necklace she'd chosen for me. "Thank you, Maya." "You're welcome. I thought it would go well with your work clothes." Even her gift selection was practical, rather than sentimental, chosen based on utility rather than emotional significance. There was no note, no card with a personal message, nothing that suggested the gift represented any deeper feeling than polite obligation. That afternoon, while Maya read one of her new books in her room, I found myself looking through photo albums again, trying to pinpoint exactly when our relationship had become so formal and distant. The pictures from her early childhood showed genuine connection and shared joy, but somewhere around middle school, the photos began to look more staged, our smiles more forced, our body language suggesting people who were performing family happiness rather than experiencing it. By the time spring arrived, our routine had become so predictable that we could go days with minimal interaction beyond basic household logistics. Maya maintained her excellent grades, participated in her chosen activities, and prepared for her future with systematic determination. I continued to excel in my professional role, earning recognition for my work and building a reputation as a leader in pediatric nursing. To outside observers, we probably looked like a successful single-parent family. Maya was academically achieving, well-behaved, and clearly preparing for college success. I was professionally respected, financially stable, and providing a comfortable home environment. But inside our house, we lived like polite strangers who happened to share space and certain legal obligations.
The realization that this might be the permanent state of our relationship hit me during Maya's junior year spring concert. She had joined the school choir, something I discovered when she mentioned it casually while updating me on her schedule. I attended the performance, sitting in the auditorium filled with parents who were clearly familiar with their children's musical abilities and involvement. As Maya sang with the choir, her voice blending beautifully with the other students, I realized that I had no idea if she enjoyed music, if she had musical talent beyond what I was witnessing, or what had motivated her to join choir in the first place. She had developed interests, talents, and relationships that were completely separate from our family life, and I was learning about them as an outsider rather than someone who had nurtured and supported their development. After the concert, I watched other families gathering around their children with congratulations and proud embraces. Maya accepted my compliments with her usual polite appreciation, but there was no shared joy in her achievement, no sense that my presence at the concert mattered to her beyond basic parental obligation. "You have a lovely voice," I told her as we walked to the car. "I didn't know you were interested in music." "Thank you. It's just something I wanted to try." "Will you continue with choir next year?" "Probably. It depends on my schedule." Even conversations about her achievements felt like interviews rather than family discussions. Maya shared information when directly asked, but never volunteered insights into her thought processes, her feelings about her experiences, or her plans for the future. As we drove home that night, I realized that Maya had successfully created the life she'd been planning since we moved to Cincinnati. One where she was functionally independent from me emotionally, intellectually, and practically. She was preparing for a future that didn't require my involvement, support, or approval. And she was doing it with remarkable competence and determination. The girl who had once needed my help with homework, my comfort during disappointments, and my guidance through social challenges had become a young woman who managed her entire life without reference to my opinions or feelings. It was exactly what she had told me she would do, and she had accomplished it with systematic thoroughness. I had gotten everything I thought I wanted: a successful career, financial security, and a daughter who was excelling academically and preparing for college success. But I had lost the thing I hadn't realized I needed most: a relationship with the remarkable young woman Maya had become despite rather than because of my parenting efforts. Maya's acceptance letters began arriving in March of her senior year, and watching her open them was like witnessing someone methodically execute a plan years in the making. She had applied to 12 universities, all of them far enough from Cincinnati to require dormitory living, all of them offering substantial merit scholarships that would minimize her financial dependence on me. The first acceptance came from Northwestern University with a full academic scholarship that covered tuition, room, and board. Maya read the letter at the kitchen table while eating breakfast, her expression remaining carefully neutral despite what I knew must have been tremendous excitement and relief. "Congratulations," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice while she folded the letter and placed it neatly beside her plate. "Thank you, Maya," she replied, finishing her orange juice, with the same measured calm she applied to everything else. "It's a good option. I'm still waiting to hear from several other schools before making any decisions." That was it. No celebration, no excitement, no invitation for me to share in what should have been one of the most thrilling moments of her young life. She treated the acceptance letter like a business document confirming the success of a strategic plan rather than validation of years of academic excellence and personal growth.
Over the next few weeks, more acceptances arrived. University of Chicago, Boston University, Emory, Washington University, and St. Louis. Each one came with scholarship offers that made it clear Maya had not only gained admission to prestigious institutions, but had done so on terms that would allow her complete financial independence.
I tried to engage her in conversations about the different schools, their programs, their locations, and what factors might influence her decision. But these attempts felt like trying to advise a client rather than guiding my daughter through one of the most important choices of her life. What draws you to Northwestern versus University of Chicago? I asked one evening, finding her researching comparative literature programs on her laptop. Both have strong English departments with good pre-law advising, she said without looking up from her screen. Northwestern's program has more flexibility for interdisciplinary studies, but Chicago's more theoretical approach might be better preparation for graduate school. You're thinking about law school now? This was the first time she'd mentioned pre-law, and I realized that once again, I was learning about her academic interests and career goals through casual conversation rather than being consulted as she developed these plans. It's one option I'm considering. Literature and law both deal with interpretation of texts and human behavior. The analytical skills translate well between fields. Her response was thoughtful and sophisticated, demonstrating the kind of intellectual maturity that should have made me proud, but instead highlighted how completely she had developed these ideas without my input or involvement. She was making decisions about her future with the kind of careful consideration that suggested she'd been thinking seriously about these choices for years. Have you thought about visiting any of the campuses before making your final decision? I offered, hoping to find some way to be helpful in her process. I've researched them thoroughly online, and I've spoken with current students and alumni through the school's networking programs. I don't think campus visits would provide significantly more useful information. Even her approach to college selection was systematically independent, designed to minimize any need for my support, opinion, or involvement. She had developed her own research methodology, established her own criteria for evaluation, and was prepared to make this life-changing decision entirely on her own. The announcement of her final choice came during dinner on a Tuesday evening in April. Maya had prepared the meal herself, pasta with homemade sauce and a salad, and we were eating in our usual comfortable silence when she spoke. I've decided to accept the offer from Northwestern. I submitted my enrollment deposit this afternoon. I set down my fork and looked at her, trying to process the significance of what she'd just announced. Northwestern is a wonderful choice. When did you make this decision? I've been thinking about it for several weeks. Northwestern offers the best combination of academic flexibility and geographic location for my goals. Geographic location, I repeated, noting that she was choosing a school partly based on its distance from me, though she was too diplomatic to state that directly. Chicago has good internship opportunities in publishing, journalism, and legal organizations. The city will provide more professional networking possibilities than a smaller college town. Everything about her explanation was logical and well-reasoned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the most important factor in her decision, the chance to build a life completely separate from our relationship, was the one thing she didn't mention explicitly. I'm proud of you for thinking through all these factors so carefully, I said, meaning it genuinely, despite the sadness I felt about being excluded from her decision-making process. You'll do wonderfully at Northwestern. Thank you. I'm excited about the opportunities ahead. The conversation ended there, but the weight of what had just happened settled over me gradually. Maya had essentially announced her departure from our family, her transition to complete independence, and the beginning of an adult life that didn't require or include my participation. The remaining months of her senior year passed in a blur of graduation preparations, scholarship ceremonies, and the practical logistics of preparing for college. Maya handled every aspect of her transition with characteristic efficiency, researching dormitory options, selecting meal plans, and even connecting with her future roommate through the university's online matching system. I tried to be helpful where I could, offering to drive her to orientation sessions or assist with shopping for dorm room supplies, but she had anticipated and planned for everything independently. When I suggested we might spend time together over the summer before she left for college, she politely informed me that she'd already accepted a position as a counselor at an academic summer camp for high-achieving middle school students. It's excellent experience for my college applications to graduate programs. and the salary will help cover my personal expenses during freshman year. Even her summer plans were designed to advance her academic goals while maintaining distance from our relationship. She would be gone for 10 weeks, returning home only briefly before leaving for Northwestern in late August. Graduation day arrived with the kind of bright sunshine that made everything feel symbolic and momentous. I sat in the auditorium, filled with proud families, watching Maya receive not only her diploma, but also recognition as valedictorian, recipient of the English Department's Outstanding Student Award, and winner of a scholarship for academic excellence. As she delivered the valedictorian speech, I listened to her speak eloquently about resilience, independence, and the importance of defining success on your own terms, rather than accepting other people's definitions of what should matter. The speech was beautifully written and delivered with the kind of poise that suggested she was comfortable speaking to large audiences.
But listening to her words, I couldn't escape the feeling that she was describing a philosophy of life that had been shaped by our relationship, or rather, by the absence of meaningful connection in our relationship. Her emphasis on independence and self-definition felt like a direct response to growing up with a mother who had prioritized career achievement over emotional availability. After the ceremony, I watched other families gather around their graduates with hugs, tears, and excited discussions about college plans and summer activities. Maya accepted my congratulations with her usual gracious politeness, posed for the requisite photos, and then spent most of the reception time saying goodbye to teachers, friends, and their families. "I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished," I told her as we drove home from the graduation reception. "You've worked incredibly hard, and you deserve all the recognition you received today." "Thank you. It feels good to see years of effort paying off in concrete ways." "Are you excited about Northwestern? Nervous? Both?" "Mostly excited. I feel well prepared for the academic challenges, and I'm looking forward to the independence of college life." The comment about looking forward to independence wasn't pointed or cruel, but it reinforced the reality that Maya saw college primarily as an escape from the constraints of our family relationship, rather than as an exciting next chapter that we might both celebrate together. The summer passed quickly, with Maya working at the academic camp and returning home only for brief visits that felt more like check-ins than family time. When she was home, she spent most of her time reading, working on personal writing projects, and corresponding with her future Northwestern classmates through social media and email. Our conversations during these visits were pleasant but superficial, covering logistics about her college preparations and polite inquiries about my work. She seemed genuinely content and excited about her future, but that excitement was entirely focused on experiences and opportunities that didn't include me. The weekend before she left for college, Maya organized her belongings with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything else. She packed only what she needed for dormitory living, donating or discarding items that represented her childhood and adolescence. Watching her sort through years of possessions and memories, keeping only what served her future goals, felt like witnessing someone deliberately shedding their past. "Are you sure you don't want to keep some of these books?" I asked, seeing her place childhood favorites in the donation pile. "I've outgrown most of them," she said practically. "Someone else might enjoy them more than they'd enjoy sitting in storage." Even her approach to possessions reflected her broader philosophy of moving forward without unnecessary attachments to the past. She was entering college unencumbered by sentiment or nostalgia, focused entirely on building something new rather than maintaining connections to what she was leaving behind. The drive to Northwestern took 3 hours, during which Maya read through orientation materials and made notes about the activities she wanted to participate in during her first week on campus. Our conversation was limited to practical matters: where to park, which buildings housed her dormitory and dining facilities, when she might call to let me know how she was settling in. Moving her into her dormitory room was an exercise in logistics rather than emotion. Maya had corresponded extensively with her roommate over the summer, and they had coordinated their belongings to avoid duplication while ensuring the room would be functional for both of their academic needs. She unpacked efficiently, arranged her desk and study materials systematically, and introduced herself to other students and parents with confident social skills.
Watching her navigate this transition, I was struck by how completely prepared she was for independent living. She didn't need my help understanding how to do laundry, manage her schedule, or handle the social dynamics of dormitory life. She had researched and anticipated every aspect of college living and was ready to thrive without any support from home. When it came time to say goodbye, Maya hugged me with genuine warmth, but also with a sense of finality that felt like closure rather than temporary separation. "Thank you for everything," she said, and I could hear that she meant it genuinely. "I know you worked hard to provide opportunities for me, and I'm grateful for that." The gratitude was sincere but formal, the kind of appreciation you might express to a teacher or mentor who had played an important role in your development but whom you didn't expect to maintain a close relationship with going forward. "I'm proud of the woman you've become," I told her, fighting back tears that I knew she wouldn't want to see. "You're going to do amazing things at Northwestern." "I hope so. I'll call and let you know how classes are going." The promise was polite rather than enthusiastic, and we both understood that these check-in calls would be brief updates rather than the kind of regular, intimate communication that some families maintained during college years. As I drove back to Cincinnati alone, I realized that Maya had successfully executed the plan she'd been developing since middle school. She had achieved complete independence from our relationship while maintaining enough connection to fulfill basic social expectations about family obligation. She would call occasionally, visit during holidays if convenient, and include me in major life updates, but our relationship would never again be central to her emotional world or decision-making process. I had raised a daughter who was academically brilliant, emotionally self-sufficient, and perfectly prepared for adult success. But in doing so, I had also raised someone who no longer needed or wanted me to be an active presence in her life. The girl who had once looked to me for comfort, guidance, and approval had become a woman who had learned to provide all of those things for herself.
8 years passed in what felt like a carefully choreographed dance of minimal contact. Maya graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a double major in English literature and political science, then went directly to Columbia Law School on another full scholarship. Our communication during these years consisted of brief holiday phone calls, graduation announcements sent via email, and the occasional text message about major life events. She spent summers working at prestigious law firms in New York and Chicago, building a career with the same systematic determination she'd applied to her education. When she graduated from law school and accepted a position at a top Manhattan firm specializing in corporate litigation, I learned about it through a formal announcement she mailed to my office rather than through a personal conversation. The wedding invitation arrived on elegant cream-colored cardstock in March, 3 months before the ceremony. Maya Elizabeth Martinez and Jonathan David Chen would be married in a small ceremony in Central Park, followed by a reception at a boutique hotel in Manhattan. The invitation was beautifully designed and clearly expensive, but it felt more like a social obligation than a personal invitation. I called Maya immediately after receiving the invitation, reaching her voicemail and leaving a message expressing my happiness about her engagement and asking for details about Jonathan and their wedding plans. She returned my call 2 days later during what was clearly a scheduled break in her workday. "Thank you for the congratulations," she said, her voice carrying the professional warmth she probably used with clients. "Jonathan is a wonderful man. He's a physician at Mount Sinai, specializing in emergency medicine. We met through mutual friends about 2 years ago." "I'd love to hear more about him," I said, hoping to extend the conversation beyond basic logistics. "What's he like? How did he propose?" "He's very kind and intelligent. We share similar values about work and family. The proposal was lovely, nothing too elaborate, just the two of us at our favorite restaurant." Even her description of her engagement was efficient and factual, designed to provide necessary information without inviting deeper discussion or emotional connection. She answered my questions about the wedding plans with the same professional courtesy, sharing details about the venue and timeline while making it clear that my role would be that of an honored guest rather than an involved family member.
The wedding itself was beautiful and perfectly executed, reflecting Maya's attention to detail and sophisticated taste. She looked radiant in a simple but elegant dress, and Jonathan seemed genuinely kind and devoted to her. During the ceremony, I watched my daughter promise to love and support someone who clearly appreciated her intelligence, independence, and strength. But sitting in the small gathering of friends and colleagues, I felt like an observer rather than a participant in one of the most important days of her life. Maya had planned every aspect of the wedding without my input, chosen her dress without my opinion, and selected a life partner whom I was meeting for the first time at their rehearsal dinner. During the reception, Maya made her rounds greeting guests with gracious professionalism, stopping to speak with me briefly, but not lingering for any meaningful conversation. When she introduced me to Jonathan's parents, it was with polite formality. This is my mother, Rebecca Martinez. She is the director of pediatric nursing at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. The introduction was accurate, but distant, highlighting my professional accomplishments rather than our personal relationship. To the outside world, we probably looked like a successful mother and daughter who had both achieved their career goals and maintained appropriate family bonds. But the reality was that we were essentially strangers who happened to share genetics and a complicated history. After the wedding, our contact became even more sporadic. Maya sent thank you notes for the wedding gift I'd selected, holiday cards with professional family photos, and brief emails updating me on major career developments. She was promoted to senior associate at her law firm ahead of schedule, bought a beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side, and seemed to be building exactly the kind of successful, independent life she'd been planning since adolescence. Then, 3 years after the wedding, I received a phone call that changed everything. "Mom?" Maya's voice came through my phone at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and immediately I knew something was different. She hadn't called me Mom in years, and there was something vulnerable in her tone that I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Maya? Is everything okay?" "I'm pregnant." The words came out in a rush, followed by a silence that felt weighted with emotion I couldn't interpret. "Jonathan and I found out yesterday. I'm about 8 weeks along." "Oh, Maya, that's wonderful news! Congratulations!" I felt a surge of genuine excitement, mixed with surprise that she had chosen to share this news with me directly, rather than through her usual formal communications. "Thank you," she said, and I could hear that she was crying. "I'm sorry to call so early. I know you're getting ready for work, but I just wanted to tell you myself." The fact that she was crying and had made a point of calling me personally suggested that this pregnancy was affecting her emotionally in ways that were surprising even to her. For someone who had spent years maintaining careful control over our interactions, this level of vulnerability was unprecedented. "Maya, I'm so happy for you both. How are you feeling? Are you excited? Scared? Both?" "All of the above," she said with a shaky laugh. "Jonathan is thrilled, and I am too, but I keep thinking about everything I don't know about being a mother, everything I'm going to have to figure out on my own."
The comment about figuring things out on her own hit me like a revelation. Maya, who had trained herself to be completely self-sufficient, was facing something that couldn't be researched online or managed through careful planning. She was going to become responsible for another human being, and despite all her education and professional success, she felt unprepared for the emotional complexity of motherhood. "Maya, you don't have to figure it out alone. I'm here if you want to talk about anything. Pregnancy, babies, balancing work and family, anything at all." There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "I might take you up on that. This is all happening so fast, and there's so much I don't understand about what comes next." Over the following months, something began to shift in our relationship. Maya called more frequently, asking questions about pregnancy symptoms, baby care, and the practical challenges of working while raising children.
These conversations were still somewhat formal, but they contained a warmth and genuine need for connection that had been absent from our interactions for years. "Did you work when I was a baby?" she asked during one of these calls when she was about 5 months pregnant. "I did. I had to. We needed the income, and I was just starting my nursing career. It was incredibly difficult, trying to balance everything." "How did you manage the guilt? I keep reading about how working mothers miss important milestones, how children suffer when their mothers aren't available. It's terrifying." The question revealed something I hadn't expected. Maya was struggling with the same fears and conflicted feelings about work and motherhood that had defined my own experience raising her. Despite all her criticism of my choices over the years, she was discovering that the balance between career and family was more complex than she had understood as a child. The guilt was constant, I admitted honestly. Every day I wondered if I was making the right choices, if I was failing you by working so much, if I should be doing something different. But I also knew that my job was how I could provide for you, give you opportunities, and model what it looks like for women to have meaningful careers. "I never thought about it that way," Maya said quietly. "I was so focused on what I wasn't getting that I didn't consider what you were trying to give me." These conversations continued throughout her pregnancy, each one revealing how much Maya's perspective was changing as she prepared to become a mother herself. She began asking about specific memories from her childhood, trying to understand my motivations and decision-making process from an adult perspective rather than through the lens of childhood disappointment. The call that changed everything came when Maya was 7 months pregnant. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was reading in my living room when my phone rang. Maya's name appeared on the screen, and when I answered, she was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Maya, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're fine," she managed between sobs. I need to tell you something. I need to apologize for something I should have understood years ago." I waited while she collected herself, my heart racing with concern and confusion about what could have prompted this level of emotional distress. "I went to a prenatal class today," she continued, her voice still shaky but more controlled. "They were talking about the sacrifices parents make for their children, about how love sometimes means making choices that children don't understand until they become parents themselves. And I realized that everything you did, everything I resented you for, you did because you loved me." The words hit me like a physical impact, and I felt tears starting in my own eyes. "Maya, no, let me finish. I need to say this." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "You worked those long hours because you wanted to give me opportunities you never had. You took that job in Cincinnati because it would provide financial security for my future. You missed school events and family time because you were building a career that would ensure I could go to college, that I could have choices about my life that you never had." She paused, and I could hear her taking deep breaths before continuing. "I spent so many years angry at you for not being available, for choosing work over me, for not being the kind of mother I thought I needed. But you were exactly the kind of mother I actually needed. Someone who showed me that women could be strong, independent, and successful. Someone who sacrificed her own comfort to give me every advantage possible." I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by hearing Maya articulate an understanding I had never expected her to reach. "Sweetheart, I made so many mistakes. I should have found better ways to balance everything, to make you feel more valued and supported." "Maybe, but you did the best you could with the resources and circumstances you had. And look how I turned out. I'm educated, independent, financially secure, and married to a wonderful man who respects my career and my ambitions. Everything good in my life exists because of the foundation you built for me." The The conversation continued for over an hour, with Maya asking detailed questions about my experiences as a single mother, my fears and hopes during her childhood, and the specific challenges I had faced in trying to balance career and family. For the first time in years, we talked not as distant relatives exchanging pleasantries, but as two women sharing honest perspectives about the complexities of female experience.
"Mom," she said as our conversation was winding down, using the word with genuine warmth for the first time in years, "I want you to be involved with your grandchild. I want you to share your wisdom about parenting, to be part of our family in a real way. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand who you really are and what you really did for me." 3 months later, I sat in a Manhattan hospital room holding my granddaughter, Isabella Rebecca Chen, while Maya recovered from delivery. As I looked down at this perfect little girl and then at my daughter who was watching us both with tears of joy in her eyes, I felt the completion of a circle that had taken decades to close. "She's beautiful," I whispered, gently stroking Isabella's tiny fingers. "She is," Maya agreed. "And I promise you, Mom, she's gonna know her grandmother. She's gonna understand how much you love us both. And she's gonna benefit from all the wisdom you've gained from your experiences." As Maya began her own journey into motherhood, our relationship transformed into something richer and more honest than it had ever been. She called frequently for advice, visited with Isabella regularly, and gradually shared more about her life, her marriage, and her hopes for her daughter's future. Most importantly, she began to understand that love between mothers and daughters isn't always expressed in the ways children expect or want, but that doesn't make it less real or less powerful. Sometimes love looks like sacrifice, sometimes like difficult choices, and sometimes like building something that won't be appreciated until much later. The daughter who had once hated me for being absent had become a mother who understood that presence takes many forms, and that the greatest gift a mother can give her child is the foundation to build an extraordinary life, even if the child doesn't understand the gift until she's ready to pass it on to the next generation.